Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. I am Michael Gracia, and as usual, I have a great show planned for you. Excuse me. So, before we get started, remember at the Wiz Comic on both Instagram and Facebook, a new strip was posted this morning. Excuse me again. Every Wednesday by 9 a.m. Eastern, a new Wiz strip is up. Also, do not forget to check out a Kid in a Comic newspaper where you can find the Wiz in. Go find kidinacomic.com, find them on social media, Kid in a Comic, and also check out Bold Venture Press, where I have illustrated a few stories in a couple of different Zorro books. So there's Zorro, Zorro's Exploits, and Zorro Swordplay and Romance, which is their latest book from this year. So check out boldventurepress.com, or you can find them on Amazon, at the Wiz Comic on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also go on Amazon and pick up the Whimsical Wiz All the 2023 collection and Kid in a Comic newspaper. Anyway, let's get to my guest tonight. He is a creator, a writer, he is a dungeon master, and I'm sure since I'm a D&D guy, we will play a little bit, not play, talk about it, I guess. But but yeah, listen, he created an awesome comic. I got to read the first issue. Um, I enjoyed it so much. And let's just bring him on and let's get started. His name is Ray Jameson. All right. How you doing? Oh, I lost your voice. Your mic is muted. Hold on.
I had to cough earlier, and here I
Yeah.
am. I'm really happy to be on. This is going to be a good time.
Oh yeah, no, I hope so. I always enjoy, first of all, chatting with people. And I'm not drawing, so I don't need my glove on. So anyway, so Ray, first of all, thank you for coming on. I always enjoy having guests on, especially I usually talk to more artists than writers, so this is a treat for me. Um, and I
Awesome.
and as someone I also write, but I tend to do more illustration than writing. So I always enjoy when I get to talk with writers. And first of all, we'll get to your comic in a little bit, but I want to know more about you. Can you tell me and my audience a little bit about yourself?
For sure. So, I am a big fan of comics since before I could remember. I had an older brother born in the late 70s who loved comic books. His favorite was The Incredible Hulk.
Mhm.
And I've said this on a couple other podcasts. Basically, being born in the early mid 80s and watching the cartoon companies, the toy companies, and the comic companies combine forces and make a really cool era of products that children just devoured and parents' wallets just cried and bled out money for.
Yeah.
And my earliest memories would be like, my brother was old enough to appreciate things like Masters of the Universe, Transformers. I was in the later era, so I remember the real Ghostbusters. I remember Brave
Okay.
Star. I remember those vaguely. Batman 1989. Regardless of whether it was the best of decisions for my parents, I really enjoyed it in theater. They showed me it that summer. It was awesome. I was only 5 years old,
Okay.
and um, uh, all through the 90s there was an entire surge, a resurgence of popularity when you and I witnessed it all. I couldn't get my hands on every comic book, but one thing I got monthly every month was Wizard magazine, and I got all of the updates through that magazine. I thoroughly loved that era. I'm not one of the people, although I do have nostalgic pieces of me as anybody else does. I don't ever wish to relive them. I like looking back and being grateful I got to experience those eras. I'm the kind of person that treats nostalgia in small portions as good, but too much it becomes poisonous, and it can actually
Mhm.
stunt your potential as you go on in
Yeah.
life. But anyways, putting that aside, in my early 20s, I moved across country for work, and I left my family, my friends, I left everybody. And now that I'm 40, looking back, um, I was too young and naive to understand what loneliness meant. I'm happily married. I've got three kids, and
That's great.
well settled in. But my friends, I had I needed excuses to hang out with them on webcam. So unlike most people that like D&D, most of them seem to start when they're super, super young. I didn't start until I was almost 30,
Okay.
and it was an excuse to hang out with my friends via webcam. I ended up being the dungeon master, and if that wasn't ambitious enough, instead of using modules, I made everything homebrew.
Okay.
And um, I I bit off a lot, but I chewed it all up too eventually, and there was a lot of learning curves, and it was a really good time. One of the things I love about D&D in particular is, or any tabletop RPG, I should say, there is nothing more satisfying than posing a problem or a challenge to your friends and then working with them passively to solve that problem. And you played D&D. I assume I'm scratching a couple of itches here,
Mhm.
but the collaboration of combined imagination, I
Yeah.
find, is just fascinating. There's a lot of catharsis I personally get from it. And after a decade of my own lore and homebrew, I wanted to take the plunge and try to express it in a different medium. So, just like an individual who watches a TV show, let's say they're 5 seasons in, and you know what? This reminds me of episode 3 of season 2. That's how I felt writing this story out. It already happened essentially. The only thing that's different from when we actually played to this comic is I took the players' characters out and added my own. That way I could just encourage more synergy and in the story and interaction amongst the characters.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy with the outcome. This is my first time on the creative side of a comic book. I've never written. When I was a kid, I loved to draw. I'm an artist at heart, but I never had the opportunity to take that passion and make it my profession.
Yes.
So when I was a kid, my mother put me through a comic course. I went through it for 2 years, where you learn about all the anatomy of a comic book: the pencils, the inks, the panels, the lettering, the colors, the covers, the layout for making a story function. So when I went from this lore I had to transferring it over into an actual comic book medium, it felt predominantly natural, and I don't know how else to explain that.
Yeah. No, no, I get exactly what you're saying there. Like, I mean, I'll just give you a little background. First of all, it sounds like your brother and I are closer in age. I'm 48, so I got to see Masters of the Universe. I got
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
Voltron, everything, watching all those old stuff. But I love, first of all, I love how you described the idea of where when you grew up and how it like affected you, and that you love growing up in the era because of what it gave to you, in the sense of you know everything being there, and you're right, the toy companies working with the comic companies and the cartoons, animation studios and whatnot. um, but yeah, and like you, I started D&D a little late in life myself. The first time I actually played, now I wanted to play when I was a kid. I was a big fan of the original cartoon that came out in the
Oh
80s.
yeah, right on.
That was my first introduction actually to D&D. And then I remember being in like a bookstore and seeing the books and remembering like the symbol, the icon, the logo for Dungeons
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Dragons. And I'm like, oh, this must be like the cartoon. And I got like the monster manual. I'm like, this is nothing like the cartoon. And I just drew the pictures I saw out of the monster manual. And then I got into like, you know, PC gaming. And I was playing a lot of like the Sierra games, Police Quest, King's Quest, all those games.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I don't remember the name of the game. I think it was like Quest of Glory or something. But that the people who created that for Sierra were D&D people. It was the first time I saw a character sheet.
Okay.
Uh, and they because that's what they used. And then when I got into college was the first time I actually played a short amount, but seeing that character sheet and having that understanding of games like King's Quest, where I had to think and actually type in to do stuff, gave me a real good understanding of what D&D was.
Right on.
and how to play. But I don't want to say I really didn't start. I didn't really play. I played on and off, when I could. And now, I play, virtually with some friends every couple of Saturdays. We try to get at least 2 Saturdays a month in. And I'm not the DM on this one, but I have DM'd and it's fun.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to say, ask you, because I've DM'd and you have DM'd, and you did, I've also done homebrew and I've done my own stuff, but I've read some of the campaigns to get ideas when I was first getting ready to DM, to see how they built the campaigns. Um, but and I know you had, you said you found it kind of easy, but do you feel there's, like, writing your campaigns out for D&D, do you feel that the I don't want to say the transition to comic was easy, but like the, because it is a bit different in writing. You're world building, you're doing stuff,
I
but
get what you're saying.
when you
Like
play when
being
you
a
when you
teen- Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, no, I was going to say, when you write a campaign for D&D, you're not there writing your characters. You're just giving, here's what your characters are, here's what they do, where they're going to be found, and then it's your team, your group playing and saying, I'm going to interact with this character this way, and it's more on the spot. How is it, you know, taking what you've done and writing it into a story format? You
Well,
know?
it's funny. There's as you would know, there's a really big contrast between writing the preparation for a game
Yeah.
and just writing out the outcomes of a game or of a story. So
Yeah.
the first time I DM'd it, I had a couple of heavy learning curves because I didn't fully understand the idea of unlimited potential. You
Mm.
read in your player's handbook, this person can do this in combat, this in combat, this in combat, this in combat. All I read was combat, 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 combat.
Yeah.
So the first 4 or 5 meetings were very combat heavy. So it was almost like some non-story first-person shooter arena, if you will, comparable in a video game. And then I would get some feedback from my friends, and they gave me the honesty I was looking for. And they said, "Well, we go somewhere, we fight. We go somewhere, we fight." And then I realized, okay, I'm over prepped. The first book I had for all the information, like written out pages, what I put in that book now, if I did something from scratch, that same size of book could last me probably tenfold,
Mhm.
because I've learned the balance of, here's an NPC, here's some quirks. This is where they're more or less aligned with life, be it their kingdom or anything else. I don't need to give them much else. Where before, this is where they grew up, this is the name of their parents. I didn't need to do that stuff. In a lot of cases, if a question came up, what was the name of your mother? I would just make it up on the fly, write it down, and that was good enough.
Yeah.
Where before I felt, well, that's kind of, it's almost like cheating, but it isn't cheating, it's just improv.
Yeah.
And eventually, there's times I've done very little prep for a one-shot game. I'll give you an example. I had 6 players. They were all invited to a dwarven noble's estate inside a mountain. None of them, I told them when they made their characters, they were not allowed to be dwarven. Okay, so they all find out they're all non-dwarves, and they all realize, like, there's not many dwarves in this kingdom area. They're kind of exceptions to the rule. And they all have different reasons for wanting to go. One of them's an assassin who's going to try and kill the noble. A big, wide range of reasons why they're all there, but about half of them did not want to tilt their hand. So they all get there. I already have the map laid out, and we did this virtually. And I said, I start describing, there's a cleric there, level 20 cleric. These guys are like level 5. And I say, I start describing how the door shuts. It's inside a mountain, so it's not like you open the window and there's sky. All the ways of exiting this manor are closed off. And the cleric says, one of you is a conduit that is trying to summon a rival god of mine. and I'm either going to slaughter you all or the conduit is going to fess up. The rest of the 3 hours was all improv and them flying by the seat of their pants. Two of them tried to kill the cleric and they ended up losing and trying to like hide in the mansion. The other four like tried to like figure out what was going on, and everybody was suspicious of each other because some people didn't want to like say why they were actually there, and I just kind of but from a dungeon master's perspective, it's actually very interesting. If you put in the right variables, the thing that hit the most with me, that really made things, it brought the enjoyment level really higher, is to let them make as many variables as possible. And therefore, as a byproduct, not the main reason, but I had to put in less work so I could just go in and enjoy the unforeseen dynamics. Now, in regards to writing a story, it's kind of the opposite. And for me, it was a little easier because I already knew events that happened. The only thing that was different, like I said, I brought in new characters. So I had to make sure that their interactions with what was going to play out made sense. So that would be the biggest difference. If you're writing a story format like this book, The Madcaps, it's 3 issues long, mini series, beginning, middle, end, 3 issues, 3 acts essentially is the word I'm trying to look for. I already know where it's going. As a dungeon master playing a game out, I have a rough idea of where I think it's going to go, but there's no guarantees.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm looking at your book right now down
All
on
good.
my other monitor. No, because I first of all, I love the art on here, but
Thank you.
what was I going to say? When let me just get up to where I want to, because I'm going to want to show the. You don't mind, by the way, if I show the book a little bit, do you?
Not at all.
Okay, I'm not going to show everything.
For sure. We're about to launch issue 2 in April, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a bit. But because this has already been released to the public digitally, I have no problem talking about deeper details in this first issue.
Okay. But yeah, so I'll get ready to show that in a few. But where I wanted to go to with my question was, okay, so like you said, you changed up some of the characters. You had to, oh wait, before I get to that, let me ask you this: was this your first comic you've ever written?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my first one. I've always wanted to do something with a comic. This is my first opportunity to do it.
All right. And just because I'm curious, being the comic geek that I am, who were some of your like writing influences that, like, when you went to say I'm going to write a comic, you maybe went back to look at stories? Or
that's a very, very that's a tricky question, and I don't mean to sound cryptic. The best way I can describe it, like, for example, I like Peter David. I think he's a great writer. I think that goes without saying.
Yeah.
If I tried to be like Peter David, the best I'm going to be is second place. So what I've really tried to do is write things that impress myself. Since this is the first time I've written, it's up to the fan base or the comic industry to decide whether I'm half decent or not. The only thing I can control is all the talent around me, from the art, the colorist, the letterer, all the cover artists. But
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just setting it up.
That's okay. It's just like for me personally, like just writing a story. Like in a lot of cases, I'll get impressed. Here's a great example. I'll drive to work, and I will play non-lyrical orchestrated music that I've never heard before, and I'll think about those 4 characters, for example. And my mind will wander with the emotion and the music. And there's lots of times where I'll think of imagery or a scene or a part of a story arc, and I'll write it down for later, and it really impresses me. But again, I've already used Peter David as an example. If I tried to be like him, I don't think I would be giving myself enough credit. And I want to clarify something. I'm not saying I'm better than Peter David, but more importantly, I will at best be the second best Peter David out there, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. I don't know how else to explain it, but for me, a scene has to really be a thing where it makes sense to me, as opposed to here's this style of writing, or maybe I'll incorporate that. It feels
Yeah.
more like I've cut and pasted a story together as opposed to actually fabricated it.
Yeah. I get exactly what you're saying, and it's because it's the same thing with an artist. You're going to absorb the stuff, but you don't want to try to copy what who you like. Like I could tell you right now, if I had to choose some of my biggest influences, it's Alex Toth and Jack Kirby probably would be my two
Hmm.
biggest influences. And half the time I look at my stuff, it looks nothing like it because I have an animation background and I'm used to drawing, more animated stuff. So my characters have a little bit slightly different feel to them, you know? Um, but yeah, I actually have studied Peter David's work. I have a lot of his work. I'm a big fan of Peter David, and I don't think I could ever come close to writing like he would write. So I write in a way that, like you said, makes sense to me. It's it's the only way I could do it, but I will go and look at something like just we take fantasy for example because we're talking about fantasy D&D. I'll never write like Tolkien, but I do know
Right.
if I read Tolkien and then I go write, I'm much more wordier of a writer than I am
Right.
if I read someone else because all of a sudden Tolkien's in my head and I become much more of a wordy writer, you
Right.
know. But it doesn't sound like anything Tolkien will ever write. It's just
Out of curiosity, what's
yeah.
your favorite story written by Peter David?
You know, I actually have a couple. I've met him a few times, and
Cool.
on the shelf. I actually, before I even go into that, I will tell you a quick story because, and I've said it on the show before. So if you've heard it, I'm sorry, audience, but it's my favorite Peter David story. I was mistaken for Peter David at New York Comic Con one year, where because if you've ever seen him, at least when I was heavier at the time, he was a little bit of a heavy guy at the time. We're both bald. We both, if I let my hair grow in, it kind of gets that horseshoe thing. It's
The
both white.
1990s Alex Ross kind of look.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very and this was I don't know, maybe the last convention I went to at New York Comic Con was like 2018, so it's probably a few years before that. And I'm in line trying to get in, like to get my badge or whatever, get checked in. And all of a sudden, I hear somebody from behind this woman, Peter David, Peter David, Peter David. And I'm looking around, like, where's Peter David? This is awesome. He's like here. And I'm like, and all of a sudden, this woman taps me on the shoulder. And she was like, "You're not Peter David." I go, "No, I'm not." And she goes, "From the back, you look just like Peter David." I'm like, "Thank you," and I had a leather jacket on at the time, and he always had a leather jacket on. So yeah, it was a funny thing. But I have some of his non-comic books here. Actually, for Bold Venture Press, he did write a Zorro book.
Oh,
I,
wow. I
I
never knew
haven't
that.
finished it, but I have started it. He has another book he tried to write in the form of Dickens, and I think he did a pretty good job. It's called Dodger, so it's based on the Artful Dodger, which is a
Interesting.
good story. Um, but if I have to pick my favorite comic book run, it was the '90s Hulk.
90s Hulk? Yeah, that's
'90s Hulk was my
understandable.
yeah that was my favorite Peter David. I mean, he's done so many great things, but like I think that will always be my favorite story that he wrote comic wise.
My favorite one is Hulk adjacent. It's a novel called What Savage Beast from the
Mhm.
90s.
Okay.
Um, I I just I read that when I was in the 7th grade, I believe, and
Mhm.
it I read it a couple of times. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
That was before I was even an adolescent, and it was a really cool take of Banner and involving the Maestro and a whole bunch of other stuff.
That's cool. I don't think I've ever read that.
Yeah, it's yeah, a good one. I'm just looking up the year it was released.
So, trying to
95.
95. Yeah, I was just in college when that was coming out. Yeah, no, I think when he finished the Hulk, what, late 90s, right? He stopped his
Hmm.
run on. I remember being a big collector in like 97 of that story of the story arc he was doing. I don't know if he ended in 97 or a
That's
little.
around the time Betty got killed off, yes?
God, it's been so long. I can't even tell you, but probably you'll probably remember better than me. Um,
That apparently it was a reflection on Peter David's divorce at the time.
okay, I could, hey, you
You're right
know,
what you know, right?
yeah, exactly. I was just about to say the same thing. You're right, what you know. And speaking of things that you know fantasy, and
I
this,
enjoy it.
yeah, I mean, who doesn't? And this right here is the cover to Madcap's #1, which I started it a few weeks ago, but just life got in the way, and
I
I
hear you.
reread the entire thing today, so it was fresh in my head to talk about, and it was a great introduction to a
Thank
story.
you.
I want to, but first, before we get into it, I want to mention that this is published by Filbo Publishing, who is Philip Russett, who's been on the show. He's a friend, awesome guy. Go check out Filbo. Does he have a website, filbopublishing.com or something?
I
Or is it
believe so.
filbo.com? I know I don't want to show the thing, but I know at the end of the book there's an ad for all his all the stuff he's got. And I've read quite a few of his books. I've read the first tragedy, maybe the second.
PhilboEntertainment.com.
Filboentertainment.com. Yeah, you guys
Yes.
go check it out. Tragedy #1 was great. I believe I read the second one. I read the first issue, maybe the second too. Because I bought them from him in person.
Right
Um,
on.
Dynamic.
I've read all 6 so far. They're the first 5 is one story arc.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm a fan.
yeah, yeah, no, so am I. And the problem is when I see him at shows and he's tabling, I'm usually tabling, and my rule is I don't buy stuff when I'm tabling. Usually, it's rare, because my goal is to make money. But if I go walk a show, I will purchase. I'm going with money to buy things. So, like the last time I saw him, we were both at the Undiscovered Realm Con in White Plains, New York, and that was June, I believe. So, which was a great show, too. But so the Madcaps. The Madcaps is based on a D&D campaign that you ran, obviously.
Hmm.
How much of it is the campaign, and how much of it was changed for the comic?
Well, the surprisingly, I used as little lore as possible in D&D and Forgotten Realms. So the mechanics, obviously, while we were playing, but there's certain things that are copyright, and
Yeah.
I tried to use liberal stuff as much as possible during the homebrew. So I want to make my own thing. I don't want to be like, all right, beholders and Tiamat in my version.
Yeah.
It's been done, so I just did my own thing. The only thing that was really different, like I was saying before, is just the characters. The characters are fresh, my own design. Ironically, they're actually based off of the players who played in the original lore. So I
Okay.
kind of did an inverse of expression, if you will.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite out of these 4?
Oh, God, I want to learn more. I got to remember their names. I don't remember all their names.
I understand.
Um, I mean, all of them had something interesting that I wanted to learn more about. But I think if you can see my mouse, let me see.
Yes.
You can see my mouse over it. This like dark
Chasco.
Chasco, yeah.
Yes.
I there's a line, and I don't know if I could give it away, so I'm not going to say it. But there's something he says in the story that makes me like, oh, that's interesting, you know. Um,
Was that during the interrogation?
um, um, yes, yes.
So
I'm
the
trying.
line was, or you can talk to me.
Well, yeah, that and the one before it that he said about showing his real face.
Oh, I see. Yes.
That and
Was
then
that
when
in there?
yeah, and then I figured since you said that I could mention
Yeah,
that.
for sure. It's open
When he,
game for sure.
yeah, so he was like, I can show my real face, and then he says, or you could talk to me, like
Yes. You know
so.
what? I actually have. Let me look it up. I'll share it. I'll send it to you. You can share it on the screen here. I
Actually,
actually.
you should be able to share. I'll just stop my
Okay,
share and
give me one sec. We'll share
yeah,
mine for a second, then come back to yours.
yeah.
I had voice actors act that scene out for me.
Oh wow,
I've played D&D with some professional voice actors,
yeah.
and they were able to. Just let me verify I've got the right one here. Yeah, this is the right one.
If I'll just say sometimes 'cause I'm on a Mac. Sometimes it has an issue with audio. If it has an issue with audio, send it to me, and I can upload it to StreamYard itself to play.
Okay, here. Let's go to present, share screen, share tab on the Book of Faces, share full
Okay.
screen. Good to go?
Yeah. If let's see if we can hear it. Yep.
Would you be able to tell me where you're going to pick up this fresh stuff? No way, man! You could save many lives here. I'd rather die. Oi!
Death is a privilege which you will not be getting today.
Are you crazy? Go for a walk. I can't heal everything our large friend is about to deal out to you. You can either talk to our dwarven friend here, or you can talk to me. The dwarf! The dwarf!
Yeah. That's great.
The wording was a little different in the book, but I just made it a little more dynamic.
Yeah,
Just the
yeah.
way the voice actor was going, I said, you know what? A little different, but I like it, so go with it.
Can you share who the voice actors were?
Oh,
Or
absolutely. So
okay.
that trailer there, I made 2 different trailers. That trailer was one man. All
Oh,
those voices was one guy. You can look him up. K-Beau Foster, spelled the letter K, Beau Foster. You can catch him on RPG All Stars. He does a lot of different games, Starfinder, D&D, and as you could tell, he's very versatile in his skill. I think he's very underrated and deserves to be more well known. That's for sure.
that's cool. Yeah, no, he did a great job. And you know what? The guy who was being interrogated, he sounded kind of exactly like I pictured in my head. Like the scream, and I was like, oh my god, that was great. The dwarf sounded great. I mean, all of them sounded good, but yeah, that one character though, just the fear, the everything.
Chasgo, yes.
I was like, that was what I heard in my head.
So the background about Chasgo, he's a specific type of elf called an Arger. Argers live in a certain mountain range that's riddled with silver deposits. Now, in real life, you can look this up. One guy was interviewed on Oprah. Apparently, if humans consume enough silver, it tattoos their skin cells. They look like Smurfs, basically. And Chasgo has a similar dynamic. That's why he has that blue skin. But because it's fantasy, he also has resistances to magic. And because of combining that with Arger culture, they're very what one would class as xenophobic. They want nothing to do with outsiders. They're considered quite primitive. And so mercenaries, merchants, mages, I didn't intend for those all to start with them, but we'll go with it. They all steer clear of that mountain range. So Chasgo, he a little bit of an exception to the rule. He viewed his family and his the culture of his people as dysfunctional. And the problem with him is he either stays with these people that he's not happy with, or he leaves and will probably be killed on sight because of who he is.
Yeah.
So eventually he was approached by a being named Annette, and Annette was able to grant him some magical gifts. Her plan, she wants him to be a champion of his people and get them to leave the mountain and explore the world instead of being riddled up and stuck in that area.
Yeah.
The best way to explain why she's able to give him these abilities, it's not that different from in the original Secret Wars when the symbiote was able to bypass Peter Parker's spider sense. So despite him having all these silver in his veins, he's able to do some fundamental magic. And one of those things is disguising himself. That was his only way of allowing himself to leave and safely live amongst others. The funny part about that is he's actually socially ascended up, and he's a representative of a noble in that town, Ivywood. If he was ever caught, he'd be in a big trouble. It's just kind of funny the way he's chosen his life to be.
Yeah. I mean, he's a very interesting character. I'm sure they all are. The one on the front in the bottom here. Let me bring the picture back up.
Dunn and Eney with
Yeah.
the hammer and the shield.
Yeah, is he the one that's two different species?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's his mother is a gnome and his father is a dwarf.
That's it, gnome and dwarf. Yeah.
He's a little bit shorter than a dwarf, and he doesn't have a beard. And he's referred to in the group as more or less a social facilitator. This whole story hinges off of him. He sees some potential employment opportunity, and he wants his friends together. These are childhood friends, and they're meeting up in Ivywood when this story starts. So the adventure hook, if you were to look at it in a D&D perspective, is we're getting back together to leave for employment. That would be the story.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I really, of all the characters though, I got to say his is my favorite design.
Dunnan, yeah.
Yeah. It's fun. You know what? Before you even tell me,
go for it.
When I looked at him, he reminded me of. You remember in the 90s when they tried to remake He-Man, the New Adventures of He-Man?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
kind of reminded me of a character I would have saw on there. You know?
Yeah, it looks kind of space opera-esque, kind of like He-Man. I get that. Yeah. His big thing is, at some point in his life, he discovered he can manipulate metals and crystalline structures like gems, glass, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know anybody with this type of ability, and from what his conclusion, his tentative conclusion is, his mother being a gnome has some influence on nature at a magic level, and he figures combining that with his father's dwarven bloodline, instead of controlling nature, he has some type of control over metals. So it's abilities he's still figuring out.
That's cool. That is a great concept for them. And while we're here, why don't you tell us about the other two characters?
The other two. So the dwarf in green there with the nice, lovely battle axe, he's a full-blooded dwarf. He comes from an area where his people decided to move out of the mountains and move into farmlands. But ironically, surprise, surprise, dwarves can be stubborn. They decided to start in the middle of a swamp and over time, through physical labor, terraform it into fertile land. Because of this, culturally speaking, his specific group of dwarves, his family and everybody that lives in that area, culturally, they're very knowledgeable in tracking down and pacifying things that go bump in the night. So if you were to compare him to D&D, the closest equivalent would be a cleric or a ranger, like a cleric of the wild, if you will, or a ranger. He's very devout to a being known only as the divine. And through the divine, he actually has some gifts. One of them, he's able to heal people, but he has some other things which You'll see by the end of the 3 issues, there's some cool things that happens with him. He decided to leave his people, move into this town, Ivywood, and erect a small church. And instead of cudgeling his beliefs onto people, instead win them over through his actions, charity, and helping those less fortunate than him. There are times he does leave the city and gets to practice his heritage, for lack of better wording, and an interesting mix of character. He was, I think, the easiest to put together, and that doesn't mean it was a better or worse character. His just clicked the most for me. Then the last guy at the back, his name is Madrakis. Madrakis is an individual, very uncommon, of course. He hails his kind. They're referred to as WYR. It's kind of not natural for the human tongue to pronounce. It's basically pronounced WERE, were.
Yeah.
And these wers or weirs, tomato, if you will, they all descend from a large kaiju-like electric eel that lives out in the ocean, referred to as the Great Storm Worm. Now, he doesn't have a tail or anything, but one thing he did inherit from his lineage is he's able to store up and vomit out lightning out of his gizzard. It's limited, no different than like a poisonous snake only has so much venom in its fangs, or the skunk with its terrible defense mechanism. It can only do it so much at a time. So early in this comic, you see him use it, and then right after that, him and 2 others, they're in trouble because they're cornered by a bunch of these undead creatures, and he can't use it again because he already used it up. The most impressive thing about Madrakis, despite his size, he's over 6.5 feet tall, he's 350 pounds, he's a large, imposing individual, but the most impressive and dangerous thing about him is actually his intelligence. And it's he likes to dabble in the arcane, but he hasn't had the opportunity to actually invest time and study as a wizard would. So he would be considered an amateur with a lot of potential. He just hasn't had the opportunity yet. One scene in it, he actually catches a creature by the throat, and you probably already seen it, and he actually sets the creature's head on fire and tosses it aside. But at the same time, the first portion of this book, there's an undead outbreak. You don't see him using any magic. So it's not really explained yet. He either doesn't know a lot of spell casting, or just like you can't run all the time, he might be very limited and it might be draining on him, but you don't really know where his potential stands.
Interesting. I know, that's great. I mean, they're all great characters, and I'm going to tell you, there's a chance you might be getting some fan art in the future from me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
They're just fun, and again, I don't know, like I said, the elf might be my favorite, but design-wise, it's the other guy down here in the bottom. But let me ask you about the dwarf. You write him with a bit of an accent, not much, but instead of saying like the word can, you say kin. Is it difficult to write an accent for you, or a character like that, or has your years of playing D&D just kind of, do you do the characters and talk like them as the DM, or?
There's times when writing it, I will overlook certain things. The hardest thing for me with accents is just consistency on what you're saying differently, or how you're angling it, or the intonation. Sometimes I have to read. It's contrast. His backstory is the easiest put together, but I had to read his dialogue repeatedly to try and catch inconsistencies of what I was trying to have him do. In regards to dialogue, something I really liked, I tried to have them all different in some way. So Dunanini up front, his voice would be the most common. So because he's from 2 different bloodlines, he draws from both, but he has a hard time fitting in with either culture. He would consider a close friend he would have a bond just as strong with a close friend as he would with a family member. So because of that, I wanted him to have a more universal style of speech. as you mentioned, Sarlacc has kind of a Scottish accent, which I just wanted to make him sound more dwarven. The other two, well, Madracus, he doesn't have a human mouth. So I wanted him to actually be mildly difficult to hear, quote unquote. So in that case, the font is a little extra fancy. So you actually have to squint and take it in. Because let's face it, if I was Beta Ray Bill, basically the head of a horse, and I have that massive jaw and I don't have the same tongue and lips as a human does, it's going to be harder for me to pronounce those words. And that was my logic behind that with Madracus. With Chazgo, when he's in his actual form, I wanted him, apparently a psychologist, if things are slightly non-human, there's a couple of theories behind it. One of them is, out in the wild, if you see something that's slightly not like you, there's a defense, an urge of like, it's disguised and it's trying to kill me. That's why when you see in horror movies, if you see something that's all like decrepit and walking at you backwards with its head upside down, it's something to do with the instincts. For Chazgo, I wanted him to sound great, but I wanted it to be like he's very smooth and deep as the voice actor did, but I wanted something else with the voice that seemed almost eerie. So that's why I inverted the colors on his speech and his dialogue to make it look like, okay, what am I hearing here? Like, why does this sound like this? So the when I had that down, the biggest out of all of them, as you mentioned, the accents, that I had to read over like thoroughly to try and catch it all and be as consistent as I could.
Yeah. Do you mind if I show the first few pages? Or?
For sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to give. Well, before I show it, can people get this still somewhere, or?
It's going to be up for grabs when I launch issue 2 in the new year. So, did I give you the Kickstarter pre-launch page for this for issue 2?
I don't know, but I have it on another screen. And I'm going to drop it into the.
Okay, cool. That's great.
Right
So.
there.
The biggest way, if you are interested in this, and I promise you 3 issues, I've said this in another stream, as they say in volleyball, bump, set, and spike. This is 3 issues. By the time you get to issue 3, it spikes, and it spikes hard. If you can follow the pre-launch, you'll know right away when this is going. It's going to be a good time. I guarantee you that.
Right. And number 1, I just put the link to the Kickstarter in the comments, so anybody watching, you can get that. Number 2, when this goes to launch in April, you got to come back on.
Right on. Yeah, I'm more than happy to come on.
So I just changed this to continuous scroll, so we could. Let me just zoom out a little bit here, so we can see the easier for me to go through the first few pages. This is it? How do you say it? Dunnan?
Dunnan. Essentially.
Okay, sorry. I've always been bad with that stuff. So that's a quote. But so the artist here, Evan, is it Queering?
But pronounced Quiring.
Quiring, sorry. Did he do the cover or?
The cover was done by Jimbo Salgado.
Oh, right here. Jimbo.
I have 4 other variant covers that were done by a variety of individuals. One of the most notable is Harvey Salterez, who did the first year of Ghost Rider Volume 2, where Dan Ketch was the rider.
Okay.
And yeah, lots of great different talent. One thing I get a lot of compliments on, I had the same colors through the covers and the interiors as Dan Kemp, who's done over 100 issues of Spawn, Marvel Knights, Daredevil, Amazing Spider-Man, very close to the Civil War era. And a lot of people really appreciate how the colors, they're vibrant, but they're over the top, but not, is how I've heard a couple people word it. Like it knows exactly what it is in regards to coloring. And Dan Kemp just kind of knocked it out of the park. One of my favorite lines in these first couple pages, as these two, here's Dunnan and Madracus entering Ivywood, looking for Chazgo and Sarlacc. Dunnan's like, I'm just happy you came with me. And they get up to these guards here, and the guard's like, give me your names. And Dunnan gives his name, and Madracus kind of sighs reluctantly and says his name. And then when you get to the next page, the very first panel, you'll see the guards, something's up. And then Madracus says, Ivywood's charges against me were dropped, and the guards look away. One thing I really wanted to do with this story is I wanted it to feel like it existed before this night where all 3 issues take place, and I wanted it to feel like the world existed after. So have you ever watched a movie or watched a story and they use like what I call lazy story writing, where they'll say, "Hey dad, how you doing today?" or it's done in an unnatural way where they're trying to establish the relationship between two people. Like, how's my wife this morning? Um, I I wanted to avoid that, and in some cases, it leaves a lot of questions for the reader. And I did that on purpose. I didn't want to spoon feed information where I'm basically winking at the reader. To me, that always comes across as almost condescending, belittling. Like, I think the average person that reads anything, it has to have some type of intelligence. I would prefer them asking questions as they read it, as opposed to, I know everything, we're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I agree. I mean that's also just good storytelling. Get them thinking. I mean, you think back. I don't read a lot of like I don't collect comics on the regular anymore. You know, one of the reasons is I've had 2 shops in my area close, so it's not like I have a place ready, readily to go to. Um, number 2, it's just too expensive right now. So what I tend to do is, if I can, I'll buy a couple of issues of a book, and if I like it, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to collect the trade when it comes out, and I know I'm going to follow it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, and I don't remember where I was going with that, but um, yeah, I'm sorry, I just lost my train
That's
of thought.
okay. That's
It
okay.
happens, man. I'm very impressed by the work here, and
Thank you.
the style, the story. Um, yeah, man, I'm so sorry, but let me see if I can get back to where I was.
So
Um,
you were talking about not being able to follow every issue all the time.
yeah,
At your
yeah,
current stage of life, I'm obviously paraphrasing, and I
yeah,
think everybody goes through that when they're a kid. They love comics, then there's a certain era that some of them stop, but then they come back into it again.
yeah.
I,
Well,
th- I
I've
think
never stopped collecting. I will say that. I have. I started in 1989 as a collector at 13, and I can honestly say there hasn't been a year that I haven't bought comics,
yeah, yeah.
since then. So I have been buying regularly for however many years that is. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm finding, and again, I still don't remember, but I'm finding I'm reading more fantasy than like superhero these days. I'm finding more
Yeah,
fantasy
well,
sci-fi books.
that's the thing. Superheroes, don't get me wrong. I don't want to use the words "it's been done." Superheroes, there's lots more stories to be told.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 problems right now with the genre. The first one is it's oversaturated.
Mm.
I think that goes without saying in regards to specifically superheroes. But the other thing is there's a lot of big names, and I think many of them are guilty of it. Marvel, DC, the rest. A lot of their stories, they play it safe now.
Mm.
Like we already talked about Secret Wars. Turning
Yeah.
Spider-Man completely black and white. That took guts, and that's what made it awesome. Mr. Fix-It and separating Bruce Banner from the Green Hulk. That took guts.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of that now, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it can be done. For example, I never followed Invincible in its series, but I watched the cartoon. That first season is fire.
Oh
Like
my God. Yeah.
I have my best man. He loves fantasy, and he
Mhm.
appreciates superheroes here and there, but that's not his thing.
Yeah.
I showed him just some clips from Invincible. It's not about the powers. I
Yeah.
mean, all of those. It's very cookie cutter in some respects. Like, you watch that opening scene with the Guardians of the Globe. There's a Flash. There's a Wonder Woman. There's an Aquaman. There's a Martian Manhunter. A Green Lantern. Nothing's new in regards to what they can do. But that story, as soon as you see that post-credit scene at the end of episode 1, you're hooked. I showed that
Oh
to
yeah.
my buddy, and he's watching what Omni-Man's doing. My buddy, he likes what's the extreme? What's the overkill? What's the limits of stuff? And he watches Omni-Man just be like Superman without limits. Oh my goodness, I need to watch the rest of this.
Yeah,
I find that's an example of that hasn't been done. It's been done, not there. This is new grounds I haven't seen, and I want to see where this goes.
Yeah.
And we're getting right to the end of that first season, and every episode that passes, it starts to dawn at you, this boy's got to fight his dad. Like, wow. Yeah, I can't even compare it to anything.
Yeah,
With the exception of the powers, of course. The powers you can compare because they're pretty cookie cutter, but the story, man, if you could compare it to anything, they did a good job of dressing it up too, you know?
Yeah. No, listen, I read a few issues here and there of Invincible throughout the years. Nothing to like say I really knew the story, knew the characters well. I watched that first season, and I now have, like the omnibuses in my Amazon wish list. It's like
Nice.
one day I'm just because I'm the type. It's funny. I was talking with one of my bosses last week, and we were talking about anime, and he's a big anime fan.
Mhm.
And I told him I prefer to read manga than to watch. I'll watch some, but I prefer to read it. I like the idea, first off, of me controlling the pacing. I also like that, with streaming services, all the anime you can sit and just watch a season. You know what I mean? Like in one
Yes.
sitting. Whereas just like, and I think this is where I was going with the other question, was because I forgot what you mentioned, but I like when I used to collect individual issues, and I'd have that month in between to think about what's going to happen. And because I can't go out and purchase every manga right away, so right now one of the things I'm reading is Berserk. Okay, it's an older manga, but it's been around for God knows how long. I never read it. You want to talk fantasy comic? It's amazing for a fantasy, and but I can't, it's $15 a book, so to go out every week, or you finish it in an hour and you want to go out and buy the next book, but I get to sit now and think. Whereas if I watch anime, I could be like, okay, I can watch the next episode right away. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
I had this discussion with somebody else. For things to be nostalgic, there's a couple of things that have to come into play.
Yeah.
Two of those things that are very overlooked but very important is if you're in the mid-90s and you're watching a weekly show, you have a week to anticipate what's going to happen, which is kind of like what you're saying there. The other one is it has to end. If it doesn't end, it will never be nostalgic. And that it's bittersweet, of course. But if you think of any really good, Walking Dead finished, Invincible finished, TV shows in the 90s. I remember watching, although it finished in the early mid 2000s, that 70s show, which started in 98, fall of 98. Like what a great show. I enjoyed it. And it had to end and it was sad. But now when I look back at it, I can fondly think of it, all of it, as opposed to it can't be what happens next all the time. It eventually has to end. And that's what makes nostalgia.
Excuse me. Yeah, no, I agree. I was actually just thinking about that show the other day. Something came up in my YouTube feed about it. But I just want to go. There's a comment from JD Smith, Digi Artist. He says, "You watch anime? Name 17. Is that an anime? I don't know. I don't know a lot. Like I said, I read manga more than I watch stuff. So I'll have to look that up. I don't know what it's about. But
there was. Yeah. I saw the trailer to one. It was very intriguing. I watched the first season. I was mildly disappointed by the ending, but the concept was great. It was called Unwanted Undead Adventurer.
Mm-hmm.
And that consisted of this guy who gets eaten alive by a dragon, and he wakes up as a skeleton in a dungeon, and essentially the entire season is him leveling up to something that will not be killed when he enters a town. Eventually he's like a ghoul and he has to wear a mask, and eventually by the end of it he ascends to become a vampire. I was mildly disappointed because it's anime. I have a certain, in my mind, this is what a vampire is, where they just, let's make it look like this, and it's respectively awesome as well. But it was very fantasy-esque, almost to a fault, where they talk about like you have to be this level of a member in the guild. I thought that was a little too literal, but overall I did enjoy that season. It's only one season right now in that show.
Maybe I'll check it out. I'm always looking, because, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this. I was saying I'm always looking for something good to read, you know. But when I choose my animes to watch, I tend to look at the ones that have tons of books behind it. That I'm like, oh God, I don't know if I could, because you know. And this is something, and I forgot who said it, but like in Japan, they don't have that, or at least years ago with manga, they didn't have that collector's mentality that we have here in America, where it's like, I buy a book, I want to hold on to the book. You know, it's going to look nice on my bookshelf, or I may want to go back and look at it and reference it or something. And I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know. Like, I have a bunch of books, but like, you take a story like My Hero Academia, or something like One Piece or Fairy Tale, where there's a crap ton of books behind it, and it's like, how long is it going to take me to catch up on the manga? So maybe something like that, I will pick up and say, I'm going to check out the anime and watch that, you know. But you know, I don't know. So it's just I would I prefer reading. Anyway, J.D. Smith. Oh, it was an elitist joke. Okay, so I you know what, I probably couldn't name, if you were asking me to name 17, I probably couldn't do it off the top of my head, unless you can count some stuff from the 70s. I was
when you said name 17 originally, I thought that was a title, because that sounds almost anime-esque. Have you seen Name 17? It's great, you know.
yeah. But if he was asking me to name 17, I'm going to go back to like Transor Z from when I was a kid, and you know, Battle of the Planets and Voltron and those things that I grew up on before even hitting anything like Dragon Ball, or that came later.
My first exposure to anime was the Western redubbed over edited version of Sailor Moon.
Okay.
And that was a guilty pleasure, because I mean, being a boy in the 90s, you like Sailor Moon, you get made fun of. Obviously different now, but for me, it actually, when I was in the 6th grade, and back when TV Guide was a thing where you could look up all the channels and what's coming out at what time, I was just randomly looking through there, and I found that at 5 a.m. Sailor Moon was on. And for the course of like half of a year, I was able to watch like the first 2 seasons of Sailor Moon chronologically, because not only did they show it at 5 a.m., but they showed it chronologically. And I watched the whole thing starting from like episode 2 or something like that. And every like, I went to bed at 9, and my parents were like, "Are you okay? Why are you going to bed?" And maybe thinking, oh, it's because he's a teenager or something. But I had an alarm clock, I had everything. I was just like, it's go time. I'm watching this before school. It's going to be amazing. And it was a good time.
That's great. That's great that you got to do that. I had some shows like that. On Sunday mornings, before Bravo changed to whatever they show back in the, I think this was in the 90s, like they changed there's things in the 90s or whatever. In the 80s, I think it was Bravo, I would wake up Sunday mornings and they would show old movie serials. So I would get up like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would get to watch, like, you know, the Buster Crabbe, Flash Gordon, and old Abbott Costello, and all these old things that like nobody else was watching. And I'd be like, this is so cool, you know. And I'd sit and I'd just get up and make myself a bowl of cereal and just watch all these old movies until it moved over to the comedy time. and that's when I got Abbott and Costello and the Marx Brothers and all
Yeah,
and that.
yeah.
That's what got me into like a lot of the type of stuff I'm into today. You know.
When I was a kid, I lived in the province of Ontario. They have a TV station called Television Ontario, or TVO, and they had a segment. It was about 3 movies long. It was called Saturday Night at the Movies, and they would show exactly what you described there. That old era of film that, like, many people, there's a certain style to that level of filmmaking and storytelling that, it's just a cool era, like you're describing. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah. Well, I want to show a comment here. JD Smith says, "When I was a kid, I'd wake up 4 a.m. to VHS tape horror movies when they were on cable." That's
Nice.
hysterical. You know, I could tell. I mean, I'm not a horror fan, but I think that is fantastic. Well, I won't say, I'm not a horror movie fan. I don't mind reading it in comics, but that I think is great. You know, and just one more story like this, I'll give you.
Yeah,
When
for
I
sure.
was a kid, my parents didn't like me watching like Monty Python and Benny Hill and like the Tracy Ullman show and things like that. So I would sneak those shows at night. Like 9 p.m. was the Tracy Ullman show, and I first started watching it when they started. I don't know if it was originally. I forget if it originally came, but they did the Simpson bumpers. The Simpsons
Yeah.
bumpers in there, and I was like in love with those things. I thought those were the best part of the show. But like I would watch Tracy Ullman, Gary Shandling show, then whatever PBS channel would have Monty Python or whatever it was, and I'd change to that, and so I'd sneak those shows late at night, and I'd pretend to be in bed, but I'd have my TV on low and like kind of sit like up close to the TV, so I could hear what they were saying and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, you know what? You just resurfaced a memory. In the late 90s, when South Park was brand new,
yeah,
my parents got a new TV, so I inherited the old one. I went into my room like, hey, I can watch TV in my room. This is really cool. And it was. But I had it plugged into a power bar. Power bars all have a switch, yeah?
yeah.
So I would lay down in bed with my hand dangling over the edge of the bed next to the power bar button, and I would play South Park as quietly as possible. And when I heard my parents walking down the hall, I would just kill the power bar, which would kill the television.
Yeah.
And you'd have it just loud enough so you could hear, but it had to be super quiet, of course. You had to be like really close.
Yeah. And you couldn't laugh hard.
Oh, good times.
Yeah. Well, it's all that nostalgia you were talking about. So,
Yep.
Man, I could talk to you about a lot of stuff here, but you know what we didn't talk about? We mentioned Philbo Publishing, but how did you get attached with them?
Well, to be honest, I wrote up this story. I had Evan Quiring pencil and ink it, and then I just started talking to talent on social media. Obviously, I got a lot of no's, but you don't get a no unless you ask, right? It's the old Michael Jordan term. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
Eventually, I got yeses. Dan Kemp, who did all the coloring, that was the next person I got on the team, and I was beside myself. This man of this caliber, with this experience and this exposure, rolling with these high caliber names. He's a high caliber name himself, and a wizard with color, high intelligence in the level of color with shadowing and lighting and depth and everything that goes along with it that I don't fully grasp.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I would talk to Phil for different reasons. The first time I asked him if he knew anybody that could provide a title cover for me, or not cover, title logo.
Yeah.
And he gave me the rates. I ended up not utilizing him, but I did make contact with him. And once in a while, I'd say, "Hey, what do you think of these panels? What do you think of this cover? I just hired a guy for a cover. What do you think of this, that?" And eventually, he decided to take a chance on me. I'm just very flattered. He liked this first timer's product. So I think the biggest saving grace is putting my level of skill, whatever that level is, aside, all the other talent attached to it. Julia, I always butcher her name. Who played Elaine in Seinfeld? Julie, I'm going to say
Dreyfus.
Dreyfus. I always say that one wrong. I always say DeFries. When she got the Mark Twain Award for Lifetime of Comedy Achievement Award, she had Jerry Seinfeld as a guest speaker. And one of the things he said about his show, he says, the reason I think it was so successful is I didn't really think of myself as the funniest guy in the world, but I wanted to make sure I surrounded myself in talent. And I wanted to do the same thing here with this book. I can't control what my skill level is, but I can control who I bring on. And I wanted people who I wanted people that would be able to contribute in a way that I felt this book was worthy of the industry.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a number one or last to the list in regards to its quality, but what I do know is if I feel it's worthy of the industry, I'm okay leaving it out to the wild to be critiqued accordingly.
Oh, makes sense. Makes sense. I just want to go to JD's comment here. He goes, I wish I had that power bar. My mom caught me watching a steamy love scene in a horror movie.
Just don't grab the wrong remote.
Yeah. That's great.
I was pretty crafty with stuff like that. Like, yeah, power bar, just kill everything, right? Oh, also to add to that story, because if everything's dark out, if you have a TV on, it's going to give that blue glow underneath the door, right? So I actually thought that in advance and covered it all in like dirty clothes for my laundry basket. So I actually blocked out the light. Nobody could see from outside of my room.
That's hysterical.
Kind of pathological, I guess.
Yeah. I didn't do any of that. I just left the TV. And the thing that was harder for me was my bedroom was right next to my parents. So yeah, no, good memories. I'm probably going to end up watching YouTube videos now of some of those old show clips.
One of my favorite, you brought up Abbott and Costello. I try to watch it every October, is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Love it.
That is I just appreciate that era. The best is one of my favorite scenes in regards to slapstick is in that when they're like run away from Frankenstein, they bar up, they put a bed against the door and stuff, and it's not a push, it's a pull. Frankenstein just opens the door up, walks after. Oh my goodness, they just keep running. I just find that so funny.
I missed watching that this year. My wife's like, "Oh, it's on TV." I'm like, I'm just not in the mood right now. But Abbott and Costello are my favorite comedy duo. I think one of the things I like about them actually is that they aren't as slapstick as some of the other characters. It's a lot more wordplay. I like
it's more banter.
Yeah, and I love that. It's the same thing like with the Marx Brothers. When you have someone like Groucho just screwing around with words and
breaking the fourth wall better than Deadpool ever could.
What does he say? Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, one of the best class. As I mentioned, I'm not a horror fan, but I love all those old Universal monster movies.
Mm-hmm.
With the
many people say that specific Abbott Costello movie was like the swan song of that era of Universal monster movies. That was pretty much it after that. That was, I think, the last time Bela Lugosi played. The only way that could have been better is if Boris Karloff was in there as Frankenstein. But that for a comedy, that was a home run, that one.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'll watch Abbott and Costello. I literally will watch a couple of times a month. I watch a lot of YouTube more than anything else. And, some days when I'm just drawing in the studio here, I'll throw clips on, and I don't know, I could just watch them all day long and just laugh. And my favorite joke I think they ever did, and I know they didn't invent it, but I think they perfected it, was what is it? 7 times 13 is 21.
Oh yeah, and they draw it right on the wall.
But there's one from what is it? Excuse me. In the Navy, I think it is. And and Bud turns to Lou and he says, "Didn't you go to school, stupid?" This is right before they do the joke. He's like, "Didn't you go to school, stupid?" He goes, "Yeah, and I came out the same way." And I just that was, and then they go into the 7 times 13 bit, and I'm like, it's perfect. It's just,
Yeah,
uh,
they're irreplaceable. I watched a couple of old boxing matches from that era.
mm,
Someone like Max Baer, whose son played Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies.
mm.
Max Baer, I don't know if you know anything about that boxer. He killed 2 men in the ring.
Oh no, I don't.
Uh,
I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with.
if you ever watch Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe, Max Baer is basically the antagonist of the story.
Okay.
But anyways, the funny thing with you watch these old boxing matches, and sometimes they get interviewed ringside, and there's either Abbott or Costello like interviewing them, which is kind of cool because you see them out of context. And if you've
Yeah.
never seen it before, it's almost like kind of like a time warp, like more new content to me with these characters. This is interesting.
I'm gonna have to look that up and see if I could find any of that. That sounds great. Wow. Oh man, we should probably get back to your comic here. Uh, but yeah, let's. I don't want to show anymore unless you'll say I can. I stopped after, what is this, page 3 or 4?
Yeah, if you want, you go a couple more pages. That's no problem.
Yeah, 'cause I
So
didn't want-
basically, these first couple pages, you see Dunnan and Madrakis entering Ivywood. It then cuts out in the previous page. Dunn and Madrakis decide to split up and find these people faster. Madrakis doesn't want to stay in the city too long, anyways. He's not a fan of Ivywood. So here you first meet Sarlacc. He's talking to a couple of junkies of a fictional drug called Weave. It's a local problem. And he sends them over to his church. Meanwhile, there's this whole what they call a harvest gala, and it's the equivalent of like a carnival or a fair. If you're ever lived near a bunch of small towns, a carnival get together that might have contests for the highest corn stalk and a bunch of other various things, including rides and that. And Sarlacc explains for them to leave, and Dunnan ends up finding him right away. They talk for a little bit, and you can go a couple more pages. That's no problem. There they are talking. And one cool thing about Dunnan, which I don't think I've mentioned to anybody here, that little telescope sticking over his shoulder. It's actually a contraption. He's actually rigged it when it's synced with his goggles. It can actually blast raw arcana out of it, kind of like a War Machine's shoulder-mounted minigun, if you will. Except it's basically like a cannon. So you see these junkies leaving, and then you see Sarlacc and Dunnan catching up, and Dunnan explaining, "I'm actually here to see you in Chasco," and it just keeps going on. By the time all 4 of them get together, there's an outbreak involving the undead. 3 of them almost get killed off, and it's a really good setup. Issue 2 is, I'm really excited to finally start talking about more of this stuff, because I've just had to like bite my tongue. But you can see Madrakis meeting up with Chasgo. Chasgo is obviously disguised as a human, and yeah, it just goes on. Chasgo, one of his things, he's the equivalent of what would be called an insurance adjuster. So you can see in that conversation, he's speaking to 2 farmers. He's like, yeah, we'll reimburse you for the horses you lost during that bandit raid, but the wagon's still functional. We can't pay for the cosmetic repairs. It's still doing its job. So take this, you'll get reimbursed for your horses, and off you go, kind of thing. But
yeah, no, I mean, listen, I know I said it before, but you are building up a really great story here.
Thank you.
And I'm letting people know. So and what I mean is, when you can get a copy of this, do it. It is,
Thanks,
if
man.
you're a fantasy fan, if you're a D&D fan, you have created a world. Obviously, I see your love of D&D. I see your love of fantasy in here, but you've created a world that makes me want to learn more about it. You
Thanks.
know,
Appreciate it.
these 4 characters, you did a great introduction of how they meet up. You know, it's not just like, hey, you 4 are sitting at a table in a tavern. or something, and you're
Right.
talking, and then somebody walks in and offers you a job. No, you had this great intro, and like
There
you
was
said,
reason for them to be there. That I
exactly,
really wanted that to be. I tried to keep cliches away, as
yeah,
much unnecessary cliches, I should say.
and you're doing a great job of it, and I think I don't. I just see a really fun comic, in front of me here,
The only
and
unfortunate thing about this is I would love to show the whole thing here. There is action. You haven't seen the action yet.
yeah,
But
no, I haven't.
some
I
things
won't.
pick up, that's for sure. It's going to be a good
Yeah,
time.
this isn't just them meeting and talking. There's stuff that happens. There's some really cool stuff that happens in the fights. But yeah, no, I mean, like I want more. You know what I mean?
Good.
Like I want to know more about the world. I want to know more about the characters. I feel there's something even bigger coming.
Oh yeah, there's something.
Well, I mean, as
One thing there's a couple things I wanted to do is with these characters, I didn't want them to be infallible super beings.
yeah,
If I was 10 and I made a superhero team, they would all be heavily muscular individuals that could all like throw tanks if they needed to, and stop meteors by the face and other funny stuff like that. But these guys, it's very clear, as I already mentioned during the outbreak, 3 of them almost get killed, and they're actually saved by local guards. And that's kind of, if this was Star Trek lore, that's the equivalent of getting saved by red shirts, if you will. So I wanted them to have some type of vulnerability, and I wanted to make sure that you actually felt for them and their actions. By this second issue coming out, at one point, one of them actually proposes the question of, when do we admit we're biting off more than we can chew here? And as I've already said, all 3 issues take place over one night. By the end of the night, they're not in their prime. They've all been doing stuff and moving around, and these aren't conditioned soldiers. So it's easy for one to get tired, or easy for one to insert thing here. But if you compared it to like pugilism, you can jab all day, but your haymakers tire you out. So when and where are they going to use said metaphorical haymakers? And by the end of it, I want the readers to actually feel the gravity of what's going on at the end of the final issue.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you got a reader here. That's
Thank
number
you.
1. Number 2, like I said, there might be some fan art coming from me, because these designs
Right on. Thank you.
and just sound like fun to draw. And yeah, no, I think you got a good thing here. I'm glad you teamed up with Phil. I think Phil has a proven track record of
Yes.
making good comics, and I don't think he would have brought you on if he didn't see the potential in what you're creating here.
Thank you.
So
Shout out to Phil Russert.
Yeah.
2025, there's some really exciting things coming out, and I'm not just talking comics, but yeah, comics as well, including mine. But you definitely want to keep Phil on your radar.
Yeah, I look at his. We're connected on, I think, all social media that I have and he has, and I don't talk to him like I'd like to. Sometimes I should reach out a little bit more. I actually don't do that with a lot of people. I get tired after a long day at work.
Comes with age. I understand.
And then drawing, you want to get your comic done, and so you kind of art is a very solitary life. So yeah, I gotta reach out to some people more that I always enjoy talking to, and Phil's one of those guys. So I'll make sure to.
I do have one more thing I can share, which
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
the main trailer to the issue 1, but it does cover essentially all 3 issues in a nutshell here. Let me share screen.
A brawny intellectual, a devout farmer, a good-hearted charlatan, and a social facilitator. This circle of friends shall reunite in their hometown, Ivywood. Before they can depart for employment, they are interrupted by a local drug problem which carries hidden, sinister undertones. Can they survive the night? And what is the source of this danger? The bond amongst these friends may be the only metric to answer such questions.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Shout out to Brooke Eiler, who also is on RPG All Stars, who narrated that for me.
Nice. That's what I want to hit. Okay. Yeah, no, that was a nice trailer. Really good, description of what you're getting there, and I'm going to share this out to not just my normal audience, but I'm going to share this out to my D&D friends that
Thank you.
share it out to more D&D people. This is something that I think, again, a D&D player, fantasy lover, any of that stuff, they're going to enjoy. And you got great art, a great story. Like you said, the coloring's good, although I'll be honest, I'm colorblind, so some of it is lost on me. But which is another reason I also enjoy reading manga.
Right, that makes sense.
I like the black and white, but it's but yeah, no, it looks. I can tell, that it's a good job. I just don't see all the colors like everybody else does.
For sure.
But yeah, no, it's fantastic. This is you definitely. I'm sorry, I don't have it on the screen anymore. I'm looking at it like you guys are seeing.
All good, man.
You guys you definitely have something here that's really good, and I want to wish you a lot of luck with it. I think we should start wrapping up just because of time, but
for sure. I'm a hyper extrovert, as you can tell. I could talk for hours about however the conversation evolves.
That's funny because I am the complete opposite. But when I get on this topic of comics or fantasy or whatever, I could sit and go for a long time. I'm the type of guy who never wants to go anywhere, and my wife gets me out of the house, and then I have a good time and I socialize. The second time
it takes a little bit to get you there. That's all.
Yeah, which is why I need to reach out to people more. I'm like, I need to reach out to people that I want to talk to, and I never do. It's not like I don't want to or I hate them or what. I'm just in my own little world all the time,
Mm-hmm. I understand.
So anyway.
I'm the kind of guy, for me personally, especially as I've aged out of childhood, when you're a kid, all the fun comes to you, right? The Christmas presents, the birthdays, all the holidays. Yeah. Even when you're in school, the sports are all available for you to at least try out to. And I've gotten to a point where I've realized I have to be the fun. That's my rule in life, not just with my children, but if I want to have good times with my friends, well, maybe I should facilitate the time to get together. That's what I've kind of taught myself. It seems to pay off a lot.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good thought. I mean, I kind of feel the same way, but I just have a good time alone. It's one of like I don't even remember what year it was. I think 2012. My wife and I took a road trip down to Florida, and like she slept almost the entire ride, and I just entertained myself, having a good time. She'd wake up, and I'd be like telling myself stories about what's going on in the road, and like I was just having a blast, alone in the car, really, So,
that's great.
Yeah. Anyway, let me wrap up. Do you mind hanging out for a moment? I'll drop you backstage.
For sure, no problem.
Awesome. Well, I want to say before I drop you backstage, thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed meeting you, talking about your project and all the tangents we went on. And seriously, we will book you to come on again when the show when the Kickstarter is going live.
That sounds just magic, man. Thank you very much.
Awesome, man. So I'll drop you backstage. Thanks again.
Thanks, folks.
Whoops, hold on.
Just me now.
It's just you now. Sorry.
I be the captain.
All right, guys. So yeah, no, that was fun for me. I really enjoyed chatting with Ray. He's got a really great book. Um, go and sign up for the Madcaps on Kickstarter. I put the link in the chat, so wherever you're watching, whether it's on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, you should be able to click the link and sign up for when the Kickstarter goes live. But yeah, just look up the Madcaps, or it's under Filbo Publishing too. Just go check it out. You won't regret it, believe me. Anyway, before I go, don't forget at the Wiz Comic on both Instagram and Facebook. Whoa, I did that pretty good. Can I do that again? Nope. Yeah, right there. Yeah, on Facebook and Instagram. Check out akidinacomic.com and A Kid in a Comic on Instagram, where you can read the Wiz and a bunch of other great comics. Check out Bold Venture Press. You know, the Zorro's Exploits and Zorro's Swordplay and Romance are the two books I worked on. But they have a lot of great books, a lot of pulp. It's all pulp stories. And next week, since it is the day before Thanksgiving, I don't know if I'm going to have a show officially. I have something planned, but I got to see what's happening and what I need to do for Thanksgiving before I say, do I need Wednesday night to prepare? So if I don't need Wednesday to prepare, I'll have a Thanksgiving show and bring some friends on, and we're just going to talk about some fun comic stuff. But I will be back definitely the following week with another great guest. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching whenever and wherever you're watching. And if this is before you're watching before Ray's Kickstarter starts, please make sure you go sign up, for the alert when it goes out. And when it does go live, please back it. All right. Until I see you again. Bye, guys.